Uh, I have fond memories of that song. It's by Kendrick Lamar, uh, and I remember listening to that album before I left for Ghana, and it being one of the only albums that I had um, on me because it was still on cell phone. So one of the few, or actually it was, I think I got it from Amazon, so I was still able to access it, and so I would still listen to the album and that song where he talks about going to South Africa and how it kind of expanded his worldview. And before he thought he knew everything, and then getting to a point and realizing that he didn't know anything at all. And I feel like that was my experience in Ghana as well. And I know I've mentioned Ghana before, if folks have heard me speak before, but particularly for this talk, I feel like the seeds of this talk was in a article I wrote for the Applied Sentience sort of online journal where I documented some of my trip and some of the thoughts. And there was particular essay I wrote called Audio Hawk, where I had gone to Ghana expecting to be able to easily fill in the things that I had not brought in my terrible packing job for a year-long sojourn. And I was like, I'd be able to find music, I'd be able to find books. And I got there and I realized it was not quite that easy. Um, I had gone to getting a lot of my music, even at that time, online, and because of sort of country rights, copyright things, a lot of the things I had access to easily were not as easily accessible. So I had to rebuild a music library. I had to rebuild a book library. And when I say rebuild, I wasn't trying to get the old songs that I had. I was actually trying to find music there that spoke to me. And it became this, it almost felt like a wild goose chase where I hear a song and then I'd ask someone very frantically, who sings this song? What's the artist's name? Da, da, da. And then trying to follow those threads. And I remember I heard a song in a taxi, and it was it's called Sansa Crome, by a very famous high life singer. And the first time I heard it, I could not remember the name of it. So I went to different people and asked them about the song. It's a song about like a hawk, and the hawk is like about the journey one takes and tries to find its way. And then it took me a while to find the song again. So that was a reminder to try to write things down immediately. But it was that process of trying to find things to both honor the person I was before and then honor the person I was becoming, right? It expanded to not only music, but language, food, dress. Um, and I just remember that process so fondly. And I think it has a lot to do with what I was trying to get to today, because creativity, or rather the process of figuring out or creating the self, I feel like is a very humanist endeavor, right? And then part of me also feels this kind of self-awareness as a person who's just started to sort of claim somewhat with a little bit of resistance, the title of artist, because I also thought that creativity was something that other people had, talented people had, or it was just kind of like this idea of the solitude, this person that it was in constant solitude, right? That was working on something and creating something, or some genius. But I feel now that we all kind of have to have a relationship to creativity, because our very lives kind of depend on it, or rather, the decision to live, I think, requires a relationship with creativity. I frame this as a call to to humanists, but I mean really people who have an investment in living an authentic life must have a relationship to creativity. I argue that one thing that binds us to all together is our struggle to become who we truly are. We may happen upon it in different ways, but from the many choices that we make on a day-to-day basis, from what we wear to how we speak to whom we speak, right, reveals a kind of person like who we are. That's part of that process of building that person. And this happens, I think, even in the most oppressive circumstances. People still create lives, meaning, stories. Today, I want to share with you a kind of a composure of different folks' stories. I asked them this question: how did they go about the process of creating their lives or creating themselves? And particularly, there was a sort of sub question, which is like, how did you create the blank space to bring that, to have that person, that new person emerge? So the stories span failed relationships, attempts at sobriety, serious diagnosis, transitions. I decided to use a form of called erasure poetry, erasure poem, to both protect sort of anonymity, but also model the art of practice. A few months ago during a platform on self-care, I encouraged folks to use the form to create kind of mantras to remind them of their needs. I hope that the choice works as an exercise in extracting the core meaning of the stories and illuminating their threads. So this is, I split it up into sort of different, I say it's like a collection. So out of each story, I made kind of its own erasure poem, but I'm going to read them back to back. I'll call out the number when I say. So this is 1. I quit, broke up, started from scratch. I slept a lot. Meditation, cried, talked, asked myself what I wanted. I created my own. Not fun, but on the other side. I hit a wall, so I burned it to the ground. It's a little bit of an explanation of what erasure poem is. An erasure poem is basically taking a text and blocking out words using a marker. This time I use a word processor, and sort of creating a piece out of what you have before you. And so these I created out of the stories folks gave me when I asked this question. This is number 2. I could no longer live weird cycle of showing up, not knowing how I got there. A perpetual fog with my own humanity. I broke in loveless relationships with multiple people, none of them knowing. In an argument, I slipped, broke. I needed a change. I tried, I tried, I tried to return. I cried and cried some more. I started looking. I couldn't face the lies, living, convince people that they shouldn't love me. I left. I left, and left I did. Everywhere but Philadelphia. Found a place to live and moved. I moved so I could breathe. Written everywhere. I told everyone my Saturn had returned and I had to make a shift. I'm not who I used to be. I walked away from who I used to be. I had to stop being so I could be. I live, I help. By moving, I gain clarity, work, and truth. I mourn what my life would have looked like if I had stayed. I was wanting to die while living. Now I wake up every day. 3. Diagnosed with cancer, had to learn to walk again, regain strength and care. In light of this, all of this, my focus became my survival and well-being. I needed to remove myself, take a leave. Everything was disrupted, yet continued, centered on getting well. I joined a group. Not everyone survived. A confrontation with my own mortality. I wanted control of my body, clarity of purpose. I'm lucky. Survived. I have sustained. Number 4. At a crossroads, loss came into my life for a time, and I knew life is short. Do right. 5. I had to recreate myself in therapy, dealing with trauma and attachment. The breakup happened. I used meditation and learning to sit with self to find what I need. I never felt my life. It took a lot from me, what I needed. Into love. I wanted more, and staying wasn't my more. I had to separate in order to find myself. I'm better than I used to be. 6. Photography was my effort to recreate myself. The first time I tried to get sober. Wasn't long after I left religion, too. The process, a reevaluation of everything. This process of recreation. Photography wasn't panacea, silver bullet, or the savior, but it was crucial. Trying to reincorporate some vision of myself's ability to envision the world, to touch a co-constitutive creative beauty. I found people, my fascination, liminal spaces, time, a co-constitutive reality, and possibly present. This is an incomplete process. I should be. There's something being constitutively incomplete, fluid, or shifty, or trickster. To queer angles on the world, see something else that's being missed on the margins. 6. I made a place for myself that is safe to be myself. I'm out. Use my pronouns. Today, I went to handle my transition. I wrote a poem, something rare. Created the blank space when I had admitted I didn't feel at home in my body. I hopefully chip away at it and set what's underneath free. Now, the last person was generous enough to actually share a poem he had written. And I felt like that had to be sort of communicated in full. So I'll read it. It's poems by Ryan. It's called Emergence, a Declaration. Rolling across Missouri, east to west, 4 years of familiarity fading until farther memories return. Mile markers, a countdown, as MAGA signs above sex stores begin to dot the interstate. I take off my pronoun pin at the first gas station, which is more offensive, my mask or my mustache? Look straight, I remind myself, and I don't even remember how. At the truck stop, a couple hours later, we take sub sandwiches into an empty lounge. We watch our topics of conversation. This journey to a place that is pledged to help me be myself is lined with all the places that remind me I'm not like the folks where I come from. I sit beside the man who isn't afraid to love a cocoon, who says if the laws drive me from the state, he'll come along. His strength seeps into me over the 4-hour drive, and we move forward together. Just across the state line waits a cocoon surgeon. He's going to tell me how they'll cut me free. It was really hard uh, taking some of these stories, which were very personal and very generous, and trying to make them both legible and something else. But it was interesting to hear the threads and the lines, some of the things, the continuities, hearing the repetition of the word process, thinking about the idea of mourning when the possibility of a new self arises, or the need for a new self. The idea of walking away, leaving, ending, some of the things that keep us in places even as they become uncomfortable or untenable, the fear of letting those things go. And then the question of mortality. And I don't say this lightly, that many of the things explored in these were life and death choices. In that it reminds me that to choose to live is actually a very, very, very heavy choice. So, and I think about, so I come back to sort of thinking about how do we create blank space? Out of lives that seem fully formed, that seem full, that seem overwhelming already, busy, consumed with work, responsibilities. But I think of one of the books that I used to sort of guide this talk is a book by Edward Danticat, who's a Haitian author. It's Haitian Heritage Month. And the book is called Create Dangerously, The Immigrant Artist at Work. And I feel like, I've had this book for years, waiting to read it for the day when I was ready to become a writer. Some kind of inspiration. I have a couple books about writers writing. Uh, and I'm glad I sort of, this talk was the inspiration to open it, because she, yeah, identifying as an immigrant artist, I think puts at the very center of her work the sort of, in the light of so many challenges, being from Haiti and understanding the context, the sort of the daily consistent struggle that it is for many folks to simply eat, have shelter, and then thinking about, which she reflects on a lot, sort of being in a, folks trying to create and put on plays during a time of occupation and as well as dictatorship. That this choice to create is a dangerous one for many people in the world, but one that's not taken lightly and shouldn't be taken lightly. She writes in her work, Create Dangerously, one of the many ways a sculptor of ancient Egypt was described as one who keeps things alive. In the face of external and internal destruction, we are still trying to create as dangerously as though each piece of art were a stand-in for a life, a soul, a future. So sort of, trying to get away from the idea that, being creative is something magical and outside of ourselves. Another book that I went to, when I was giving a talk at St. Louis, the Ethical Society of St. Louis, and during the pandemic when I was interning there, someone suggested this book called Free Play: Improvisation and Life and Art, um, and it's written by Stephen Nachmanovich, and he says the artist is, as it were, an archaeologist, uncovering deeper and deeper strata as he works, recovering not an ancient civilization, but something yet unborn, unseen, unheard, except by the inner eye, the inner ear. He's removing surfaces. He's not just removing surfaces from external object. He's removing apparent surfaces from the self, revealing his original nature. And in this way, and I think about that, this like sort of art and creativity are about access to kind of an information which we may have developed blockages. Right? And what might those blockages be in terms of who we are in our daily lives and what bodies we occupy, whether it be racism or sexism, xenophobia, things that keep us from accessing or being able to see the real things that we wish to become or wish to be. And I think, and then Edward Danticat sort of comes and talks about memory and how sometimes forgetting is a way of soothing a certain kind of pain that one doesn't want to confront. But as an artist, as an immigrant writer, far from home, memory becomes an even deeper abyss. It is as if we had been forced to step under the notorious forgetting tree, the sablier, that our slave ancestors were told would remove their past from their heads and dull their desire to return home. We know as immigrant writers, we must pass under the tree, but we hold our breath and cross our fingers and toes, hope that forgetting will not penetrate too deeply into our brains. So the challenge is remembering. The challenge is seeing. So what I hope to today is that, as we kind of develop for ourselves, like how, from hearing these stories, how we might, or we have, or remembering how we have, when we face this kind of the blank space, the blank area, right, from which one can create, but at the time, right, it might be scary, there's this unknown. What is the disposition that we take? How do we use our faculties for information to digest, to search, to see, to hear, the depth. How do we put into practice that seeing, facing the things that might be difficult to see or face? And then, to step into that unknown, which is not unlike play, not knowing what will become, but holding hands or joining with others in that search, in that revelation. So, and I realized when I wrote this talk, I used the word imagine, and I realized it was a bad word. Now, not the right word. Imagine that I would become this person. I wouldn't have had the example to say this is who you could be. But then I think about the word process, and that when things are in process, part of the process is not knowing what will become. Part of the process is not knowing what will result. But the creativity is investing in that process. We're going to play this one last song. And yeah. Thank you all for hearing my words in other words. So this next song is one of the reasons why the playlist is so hip hop heavy. It's because it's the 50th anniversary of hip hop, which is, we're in the Bronx, even though we're called the Riverdale Yonkers Society. It's still technically in the Bronx, and hip hop was born 50 years ago in the Bronx. So I don't know if I'll have another opportunity to speak to you all in this position. So I wanted to make sure that the last songs that I curated for a platform would be, representative of the thing that also probably was the first time, or some of the first times I heard what it was like to try to authentically speak your reality, or speak to who you are.